given the risk and the rise in these untenable nuclear verdicts, why are carriers still making these preventability determinations? So maybe we'll deal with the why, and then we can jump into the how, if that sounds right to you guys. So I have a few reasons for the why, but I'd certainly like to hear from you guys first, because I stole mine from a legal article written by somebody in the firm. So
I would like to ask David, being closest to the industry recently, and why did y'all do it, David?
I think for me, the why is so I know what I'm dealing with. So I know I can either, benchmark's not necessarily the right term, but at least internally gauge the success or lack thereof of my fleet in terms of safety performance. Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? What do we need to do differently? Compare and contrast between different, and I've worked for some large carriers, so compare and contrast different geographic regions, or even within terminals. So I know there are ways you can still do that without putting a P or an NP next to a crash. But I think a little bit old school, and some of the carriers that I was with are certainly more legacy carrier, have that approach. So because we've always done it that way is one answer. And certainly over the more recent years, we did have those conversations with the legal department or within peers in the industry about or at conferences and different things. Should we still be doing this? So that conversation is out there. If I was starting a new motor carrier today, I might take a more serious look at that. And do I need to assign those? You've got risk either way. The crash happened. Whether or not I say it's preventable or not is, not necessarily going to protect me fully from an adverse judgment or from a nuclear verdict. But I understand the legal, perhaps the insurance world standpoint on, or viewpoint on, not adding to the risk, if that makes sense.
I totally, just my seat, I totally agree with that position. I want to see it used to determine where we go with training, where we go with selection, all of the things we've talked about. There's a need for the data, right? The root cause. We got to know what happened so we can hopefully prevent it going forward within the fleet. But I don't know it needs to be publicly recorded, I guess is the statement, to become a smoking gun. Maybe the blue ink and black ink, like you said, David, there's a way to write it without recording it.
The thing is that the other side of the house, if you will, is going to do it if you don't. So right? So they're going to try and throw it back on you. So if nothing else, from a risk mitigation standpoint and liability, you should do it. But I think, to me, the why coming at it from a safety perspective is you want to make you want to correct, and if your driver was at fault or had errors, you want to correct that, and you want to spread that message to other drivers in your fleet so you can improve your safety programs and not have those situations occur again.
Well, let me ask y'all three. Y'all are in different motor carriers every day, as I am. But do y'all see this is something I see as a need for? So motor carriers, I don't want to give advice, but it's what this is about. But I see very few doing true root cause analysis after anything, crash, injury, any event. And I think that's so critical to what we're talking about today, but just to what you just mentioned, Steve.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Some of them are doing it more than others. And frankly, I think you could say the same thing about the government, right? The government doesn't do that type of analysis, even with all the resources they have. There's still a lot of questions about crashes and what contributes to them and how we can mitigate them. And is the regulatory framework appropriate to mitigate crashes? So there's a lot. So.
Okay, let's, I just want to kind of keep on track here, keep on this motor carrier kick. I'm going to give you my answers that I lifted from a paper by Mike Langford, who is a partner at the Scopelitis law firm. He was writing in the Trucking Industry Defense Association. Sounds like a lawyer thing, never been, probably won't be invited. But he gave 3 reasons for preventability, for making preventability determinations. The first is assessing if remedial training, discipline, or termination is warranted. And that's one thing we didn't mention here. We talked about trends, but we didn't talk about what are we going to do with the driver now. So that's one. The second is providing metrics to discover the trends that need to be addressed. These, Mike talks about sort of global trends, like technologies that might avert accidents or trainings on specific scenarios or intersections, that sort of thing. And then finally, and I thought this one was interesting, defense in a post-termination employment claim, right? So we need to have reasons for our actions, I suppose, and that's another important, from Mike's perspective, an important factor here. So I think there's a lot of really good reasons, and we can say it's for safety, and we can definitely believe that. And the reason is because if we don't know why the crash happened or if we could have prevented it, then we can't act toward that in the future. So let's talk a little bit about the how now, just for a second. And I've worked with a few carriers trying to set these types of programs up. There's a lot of different ways to do it. I was with the American Trucking Associations when they published this gem, the Trucking Industry Guidelines for Recording Fleet Vehicle Accidents and Determining Preventability, which is a very catchy name. It doesn't even come with an acronym.
Did you come up with that name? Was that, you had to have titled that, Sean. That had to
I added a couple extra words. Yeah, I thought recording vehicle fleet accidents was super important, so I added that. Thanks for asking, Bert. Yeah, they were going to put my picture on it, but didn't fit. I totally forgot my train of thought. Oh, so this book tells us a little bit about how to develop the definitions around fleet vehicle accidents, as well as typical scenarios in which, that may be preventable or not preventable. They've since redone this book, and you can still get it at ATA's website. The National Safety Council also has a similar document that's very useful. But let's just talk about, in general, we'll start with, I'm a small motor carrier, 50 trucks, and I want to start making preventability determinations for the reasons we talked about before. What are our first steps in, what does it look like? Is it just a safety director? It's a small fleet. Is it just a safety director kind of looking at police accident reports? Does it involve the driver or other people? What do you guys think about the best way to set something like this up?
I think in a small fleet, it's more likely to be just the safety director or similar that's making that determination.
And I would hope, if in that case, that he has that resource there, Sean. I've seen it. I like it. It at least gives him or her some guidance. Yes, absolutely. And the smaller fleets, that's what I see.
So what information are they relying on then to make the determinations? If it's just one person with a very distinct set of circumstances, what are they relying on?
Typically, I think it falls back a lot to the police accident report, the looking at damage to your own equipment, the adverse party's equipment, the other party, I shouldn't say adverse, but the other party's equipment, interviewing, having a conversation with the driver, reviewing in-cab video or dash cam type video if anything exists, hours of service logs can be a data point for that. So as much information as possible, but probably the police accident report is at the core of that.
Yeah, and I would say today, out-facing cameras have changed a lot of that. These things are put to bed pretty quick if they have the camera information.
Well, and I think going further, I think all that's great thoughts and input, but the history of that driver, what's the hiring practices of the carrier, what training they've received, because all those are potential risks. If there's a legal action, those types of things are going to be brought up as part of that process. So those are other things that should weigh in at some level.
Well, I think about my comment earlier about root cause and how we stop. We'll use a small carrier, and I think even large carriers stop going that deep because of things they don't want to know, or maybe they know and have turned a blind eye to, and no one hit me for that. But we know drivers are pushed. We know drivers run hot loads. We know drivers have family issues. We know drivers don't get proper rest sometimes when they're off. And I rarely see us go that deep to make that determination. And those are critical. And we know they are. We talk about in every conference we go to.
And that's why I brought them up, because I agree with you, Brett. I don't think people go to that depth, and that's a question, right? Because if you go to that depth, you're potentially exposing yourself, right? But wouldn't you want to know that rather than not know and be prepared how to deal with it? I mean, that's a question. But